All right, welcome, Lee Davy. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Robert. Grateful to be here.
So, you're an author, speaker, internationally acclaimed well-being expert, and most notably for our conversation today, your focus is around breath work, and that's a subject that we're hearing more and more from a health and well-being perspective, from the cognitive benefits, spiritual. So, there's a lot of layers within the physiology of breath work. How'd you get into it?
It's really interesting. I've been kind of piecing together my own puzzle for really more than the last 30 years, and it's like something within me knew that there was more than what I was being told, learning in school, perceiving through my senses. It was like, how can I actually feel better, within myself in this physical form? And around 13 years old was the first time I remember asking questions, and it's just kind of like one step, after the next showed up. First, it was, working out and changing my nutrition and learning about supplementation and detoxification, and I was in martial arts very early, and every step led to the next. And then, about 8 years ago, I found breath work, and I had a friend take me through a session, and I got when you do these deep cyclical breaths, part of the physiology, if you're not used to it, is that you can feel lightheadedness, tingling sensations in and around the ears, the lips, and even what's known as tetany, where the hands kind of freeze up. And I felt that, and my kind of half my body started to seize up, and I'm like, I just fell in love. I'm like, okay, this is one of my tools. This is one of my pieces. And ever since then, I've just been playing with it, and that's how the 5D breathwork method was created. Was just me kind of losing myself in my own practice, and kind of learning along the way. And then I developed a teacher training from it, and we're launching the Breathwork Atrium this year, so an academy for breathwork enthusiasts. So it was just kind of a logical or illogical, maybe, next step in my journey.
So it sounds to me like you're someone who has always been kinesthetically in tuned and quite intuitive around how you navigate through the world and physicality and how that affects things like emotion, cognition. As I'm listening to him, I'm like, okay, Lee sounds like he's always had these questions and he's always been pursuing well-being practices. For a lot of people, that's a very confusing road to go down. They don't know exactly where to start. And a lot of people that I work with emergency first responders, I work with school districts. Breath work seems to be a great anchor point for people to get into well-being based practices. What's some of the neurophysiology behind breath work to where anyone can notice a benefit in their life relatively quickly?
It really, really is. It's such a beautiful catalyst, and I kind of point out to people that it's the one tool, the one medicine that we can't go without. I mean, we can go without food, we can go without water for a number of days. We're not going to get very far for very long without the breath, and we're not taught how to breathe, just like many other things. And most people, and I always kind of play with this a little bit, like if I were to really take these short, shallow breaths, I mean, I'm sure you feel anxiousness from me. I feel anxious, and that's the way most people breathe, is these short, shallow breaths in through the chest. And when you start to switch that and say, okay, I'm actually going to intentionally deep diaphragmically breathe from my stomach to actually fill the diaphragm, to fill my lungs, right? And you do that cyclically, you start to manipulate and play with the carbon dioxide and oxygen levels. You start to lower the CO2 levels, and you create an alkaline, oxygen rich environment. And if nothing else were to happen, disease can't live in that type of environment. But as you incorporate this into your practice, I mean, it produces mitogenesis, so your mitochondria, which are the energy production components of the cells, that begins to increase. Your microtubules, these little hair-like fibers that hold on to kind of old, unserving patterns, energies, even like old wounds. It's said that we come back with our kind of our cellular memory. You begin to liberate that, and so these microtubules, they begin to oscillate much faster. So cell communication picks up, and we literally the microtubules themselves are for emitting light. So we literally begin to emit more light. Um, the cells begin to recycle and repair and rejuvenate, and the proteins do the same thing. And you can activate the pineal gland. There's so many beautiful neurophysiological components that stem from doing, even a 10-minute session. But if you incorporated 10 to 20 minutes every single day, your life can change.
You said something interesting. We don't know how to breathe. We're not taught how to breathe. And for a lot of people listening to this, it's like, well, I'm still alive. I've been breathing my entire life. It's like, yeah, you're breathing, but it's how you're breathing. And you pointed out that we're constantly taking short, shallow breaths as if we're in a state of panic, as our body would interpret that. We're constantly stressed. We're fighting traffic on the motorway or on the trains or buses, however we commute back and forth. We're sitting in our computer, well, not in our computer, at our computer, hopefully. Being in your computer, much bigger problem. We have forward rounded shoulders. We're hunched over in what Vladimir Yanda would have called traditionally an upper cross syndrome. And that's affecting our respiratory mechanics in deep ways. What happens? You went through beautifully all the neurophysiology behind breath work. What happens in real time to my experience of the world and how effective I am in the world once I take, let's say, 10 minutes? So I have a meeting this afternoon and I'm constantly exhausted, hypothetically, let's say. I have complete brain fog. I'm feeling levels of anxiety. And none of that is really improving my performance when I have a critical meeting in front of the board at 2:00 in the afternoon. What can breathwork do for me in real time?
Absolutely. Another beautiful question, Robert. Just think about when we're so focused and so busy, and you mentioned kind of the fight or flight response, right? So if we're always focused on the external person, thing, or circumstance, right, and doing and tasks and meetings and all the things, it creates a very incoherent brainwave pattern, right? And that incoherence is what leads to the stress and the physiological chemistry that makes us feel stressed and short of breath, and it takes away our ability to focus. It takes away our ability to communicate clearly. And so when you just take that pause and you say, okay, I've got this big meeting coming up and not necessarily feeling the greatest right now, or whatever it is, and I'm just going to sit for 10, and I'm just going to and it doesn't even have to be a breathwork session in the way that I offer them, but if you can just take that time for yourself, close your eyes, shut off the outside world, do some of these deep breaths, your physiology is going to change. You're going to feel much better. There's going to be a level of coherence that comes back into your mind, and it's going to allow you to communicate more freely, more precisely, more concisely. And again, if you were to incorporate this every single day, it's like with each time that you do, there's going to be another little step in just how much better you can feel on a day-to-day basis.
There's two questions that are in my mind. Well, one is a thought. The first is a question, and that is, when you say just take time. Now, I could see a benefit in just doing that, just being present in the moment. Everything else that you're worried about will be there in a few minutes from now. Don't worry. It's not going to leave you. How do you breathe? What are the mechanics, even if you're just doing this for 5 minutes before a meeting, of breathing that you should be engaging in versus how we normally take a breath?
So yeah, for me, I kind of lose myself in the process. So I will literally just play with it, you know, and
Hold on one second. I'm sorry, Lee. There's something in the background. I'll edit this out. No problem. But also, is there a way to be a little bit closer to the microphone?
yeah,
There's a ton of background noise, which again, not a problem. I could like, I'm a horrible editor, but I still know how to edit some of that stuff out now. But the closer you are to the mic, the better the original audio quality will come out.
yeah.
Okay.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask the question again,
Okay.
just so we can lead right into that.
Okay.
I have a thought around that. But before I even get into that thought, I have a question. It's kind of a simple one. When you say being present and taking some time to breathe, what are the proper respiratory mechanics? How do I go about doing that versus how we're normally breathing day to day?
So super easy way if you don't have any training or you've never taken a workshop or anything like that, place your hands on your belly,
Mm-hmm.
close your eyes, and just nice, deep, and full in through the nose. And you're going to feel your belly continue to expand, go all the way to the top, and then just let it go. And as you let it go, breathing out of the mouth, you're going to feel the belly contract. And just do those deep, full inhales, and then just relax more and more on the exhale.
So you inhale through the nose.
Correct.
And when I do that, it's almost like my diaphragm is this balloon. I feel my belly and my rib cage protrude out and back into like my waistband and into like even the seat that I'm sitting in right now, the backrest. I feel my ribs almost inflating, like there's a balloon in there holding it. And then when I allow that air to pass out through my mouth, the balloon gradually deflates. If that analogy even works for people.
That's perfect. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah.
And the thought that I was having, if you don't have access to clear thought, if you don't have access to understand what it is that you want to accomplish, whether it's in a meeting or whether you're just connecting with your family or your friend over a coffee, you don't really have freedom. Like a lot of times when we think about freedom, we think of civil liberties. When I think about freedom, I'm thinking about the ability to be intentional around your life and you're not just your outcomes, but your life experiences and have access to that inner capacity to actualize those intentions. It's like if you're walking around in brain fog and you don't feel well, you can't possibly, in your outward expression of life, be free.
Mm-hmm. I love this. I love this conversation, and I would agree 100%. You know, it's freedom to me is in how we show up in our lives and being able to show up, you know, true, authentic, humble, noble, being able to show up without kind of playing into expectation or expecting anything in return. And really, you know, I think there are layers and levels to this. You know, if we don't have our health, if we're not breathing, if like you said, if we don't have clarity of mind, how free are we? And I think it does play into it's not only the freedom within ourselves and you know with and between our relationships, but it really does go into to society, you know, and how we operate. And you know, in my eyes, if I'm not able to go anywhere and do anything I choose, so long as I intend no harm against another being, then I'm not truly free.
No, you're not. You know, let's talk about society for a bit. Let's talk about society. You're hearing this more and more in conversations that people seem so much more agitated and hateful and offended by one another. And people seem to be, and I'm not saying this in a negative way. People seem to be sensitive, but almost in a way where people seem to be wounded where, I went to the mountains last weekend and with my wife, and I'm pretty pasty. So I was out in the sun for like maybe the first time in a while. And, if my wife walked behind me and she, gently slapped me on the back, normally I would find that affectionate. I would respond in a different way. But if I have a sunburn and I'm wounded, I might react in a way like, whoa, what are you doing? And it's like, that's not a normal reaction, but it is if you're wounded. It is if you've just been burned and now somebody's touching upon that point of insult. I think that's kind of what's happening in society. We feel threat. And a lot of times the way forward is through, well, just think about this. You're thinking about A, just think about B. And it's like, all right, but if you go to a psychiatrist, they'll say if you're in a space where you can't even access thought therapy because your biochemistry will not allow you to engage in those conversations in a way that facilitates, I think, the best way forward for you, they'll put you on medication to alter your biochemistry. And I'm not saying you should or should not be on medication. Doctor prescribes you medication. Absolutely. They have a reason. They probably know what they're doing a lot more than I do, or at least I hope they do. How does breath work change your physiology so that we can react to each other in a way where we're not coming from threat, we're coming from the safety to be open to one another and to ourselves? Does that question make sense?
And as you were speaking, one of my favorite quotes: "Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and God." Call it source, call it energy. It doesn't have to be God. It's not the white man in the clouds. Let's just say it's an energy. There's something called the quantum field it's this infinite energy source that is not only all around us and within us. It is us. It's just we're perceiving that we're separate from it, and I think it stems from people not knowing themselves and not really knowing. We've kind of been fed this idea and societal roles and perceptions of who we think we are, and it's so much more than that. We're so much more powerful than that, and we've kind of been trained to give our power away again to the outside world. And breath is an opportunity for us to shut down the thinking mind and to really, like, the body's got such an incredible pharmacy within it. And when we leverage the breath, we use the breath as a catalyst to not only do a lot of the things that I suggested before, but to activate the pineal gland. And within the pineal gland, there are these little calcium carbonate crystals that begin to shimmer and shake, and the gland, the pineal and the pituitary, they begin to release super powerful antioxidants, chemicals that are found in hibernating animals, and like a bioluminescent phosphorescent molecule found in eels. So there's this cascade of chemistry that really floods the body, shuts off the thinking mind, allows us to come back into a state of peace and stillness and coherence in mind, and really heart-centered connection that it allows us to begin to know ourselves again, to begin to not be in such a reactionary state, but to be able to take those pauses in our life and say, okay, if I'm reacting, then there's a trigger, there's something outside of me that is kind of having control over me. And when I take these pauses and when I take these breaths and when I calm my mind and bring peace and clarity and coherence back to it and start to really get in touch with how I'm feeling, I'm able to respond and I remain in control. And I think, this is kind of the bridge that we're in the process of crossing.
There's a couple of things to unpack there. One is that freedom notion again. The difference between reacting to impulses within my environment and intrinsically intending to respond, choosing a response. What's also interesting is what you said, Lee, about this true self. That always catches my attention. I'm fascinated about all things around what's being projected versus who you really are, and how do you even discover that? And are you even this one singular person? Maybe there's many versions of you. But what I'm hearing as someone who is not an expert in breath work, it's that when you are in a state of heightened arousal and reactivity, you don't listen. It's hard for you to listen, not only to the people around you, which is critical for collaboration and the fostering of relationships, but you're not listening to you. You've got all this stuff going on inside your brain that you're not even listening to your body and what your own sensory impulses are trying to tell you. So you're having kind of like an out of body experience, and not in like a mystical or fantastical way, in a highly destructive way. So what would it look like if I was going to say, you know what, I'm going to take responsibility, not saying that I am the cause of what's happening to me and all this frenetic energy and anxiety, but I've got to deal with it somehow. So I'm going to take responsibility for altering my state through breath work. Where would I start? What would an effective breath work practice look like?
Well, and again, I love what you said, Robert, because I feel like there are a few different things that are happening, um, and as we give our power away, and as we've been trained to do this, we're also, I think, society, the world, humanity has gotten into kind of a fallback position of I'm the victim.
Mm.
I don't have any control. Like, you did this or they did this, or it was the situation or the circumstance. And one thing about taking radical self-responsibility is that we not only do we take our power back from these things, but we stop playing the victim and we say, you know what? Every decision that I've made, maybe there were other people involved, but ultimately I made the decision that got me into whatever the situation is that I'm in my life. And if I got myself here and I've taken that power back, I can now get myself out. And where I am today has no bearing on where I'm going. If I then take this power, take this control back, and start to create new decisions in my life based on, again, going back and using the breath, a more peaceful mind, a more coherent state of mind, a healthier physical form, again, all the aspects that we talked about. And so, as I said from the outset, I love to just play with it.
So, all right. So yeah, let's take it from the play.
So I literally just have people play with it, and whether that means, in through the nose, out through the nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the mouth, out through the mouth, just kind of lose yourself in that process. As long as it's cyclical in nature, as long as the inhales are deep and full from the belly, and then you're relaxing on the exhales. You can play with the speeds, so you can speed it up or slow it down. And then you're going to play with the holds as well. So sometimes we hold on the exhale and hold as long as you can. At that point, the CO2 levels are really low within the system, and your oxygen actually binds to your red blood cells. So that's kind of where the tingling sensations and the tetany, like the freezing of the hands and that sort of thing, which I spoke to earlier, comes from. Right. And the CO2 levels are slowly building back up, right? And then you take that breath in, and again, sometimes you take it into the brain, into the pineal gland to activate the pineal gland to bring even more coherence into the brain. Sometimes you take it into the heart. And literally just, like I said, close your eyes and lose yourself, lose the thinking self, the self that you think you are, lose that part of you in this process. And as you do, as you go through 10, 15, 20 minutes, the thinking mind is going to become more and more dormant, and the physiology is going to release into the bloodstream, and you're going to feel this euphoric, beautiful, peaceful, yet energized sensation from within. And you're going to come out on the other side and you're going to be like, what? I love the thought that you can't unexperience an experience. So even if you're skeptical, like, oh, this probably won't do anything, try it. I offer Tuesday sessions. I offer a Tuesday session at 2:22 Eastern time for free. Come and try it and tune into how you feel before and how you feel after. And I guarantee you're going to feel different.
There's a couple of things that you're saying that I really like. And the first is playing with it, following your curiosity. Whether you're dealing with executive coaching, you're facilitating a group workshop, following your curiosity helps you to find a point of attention. And if you're focusing on something that you're curious with and you're adapting to it based on the feedback you're getting, whether from the group or your own sensations within your body, you're not only altering your biochemistry, but you're also not focusing on all of those things that are distracting you within you and around you in your environment. So that by itself, you're finding out what works for you. And the second thing that I like that you're saying is around just try it. Because people have different belief systems that they're skeptical sometimes. We have a way that we operate, and just getting out and exploring novelty, like go through a cycle of breath and just see what happens. Like be really clear. Where am I right now? What is my physiological state? What's my emotional state? Can I give it a number? Maybe give it a scale from 1 to 10. If I'm feeling anxious, am I at a 5 or a 6 or an 8? Just go through this. And then you might not be at a level 7 euphoria after going through just a single short session of breath work, but you might be at a level 2 anxiety versus a level 7. So think about going into your next meeting. Think about reading your kid a bedtime story. Think about your spouse just sitting across the dinner table from you tonight. What's that experience and that memory going to be at a level 2 anxiety versus a 7 or 8? Just go through it and test it and say, well, okay, wow, what can I do with this? You don't need anybody to tell you. You'll have the reference point, the validity of your own experience.
Absolutely. And I love this idea of retraining our nervous system, this is another thing that you can kind of tune into, as you really leverage the breath, is because again, we've gotten so used to and trained our bodies to react physiologically from an external thing, person, or circumstance, right? Mm-hmm. So something happens outside of us, it triggers us to feel fear or to feel anger, right? And we're like, it might not even be something that we're aware of, but just automatically. And if you can, again, it will take practice, but if you can get used to this, okay, I'm feeling this thing now all of a sudden, identify it. Again, close your eyes, put your hand on your heart. What am I feeling? Okay, I'm feeling anger right now, maybe even a little bit of rage. It's like, okay, like what is the rage from? Then you can identify, okay, I'm gonna sit with this. I'm not gonna like push it down or stuff it or throw it in the background. I'm actually gonna sit and feel the rage. I'm gonna feel the anger. I'm gonna breathe through it. What happens is we begin to retrain our nervous system so that same situation, that same thing that made us feel the rage initially, we don't feel it the next time. So it no longer has a grip, has a power over us in our lives. And if we do that in every situation and get really good with identifying the emotions that we're feeling, we can go back and we can heal so many childhood traumas and wounds and things that were done to us from others and ways of feeling that most people are not even aware of. But you can become aware of them. You can step back from them. You can take that pause and you can retrain your nervous system so that it no longer has a bearing in your life.
The practice of sitting with what am I feeling is not something that we're commonly taught. Usually we don't connect with it. We're like, I'm really upset right now. Well, upset's not a feeling. No. Or we're taught if you're feeling something and it's not quote unquote positive, well, don't feel that. Somehow focus on something else and reframe it. which is easier said than done. But when I sit with it and go, well, okay, I'm upset, but when I'm actually feeling, your word, rage, when you clearly identify what it is you're feeling, it decreases the intensity of that feeling almost instantly. So you can engage in more constructive practices like breath work in order to learn from it and navigate around it. So you can choose to feel something else that may or may not be more constructive. Why does the breath have to be cyclical? You talked about cyclical rhythmic breathing. What's the physiological difference between that and breathing in any other manner?
It's just gonna, I mean, you can, again, you can play with the speed, so you can slow it down. But if you think about the exchange of your carbon dioxide and oxygen, typically the way we breathe, it's kind of a one for one. And if we can increase the amount of oxygen that's coming in and the amount of carbon dioxide that's going out, that's what's going to start to kind of rebalance what's going on inside of the body, right? And then when the CO2 levels are lower and we do move into the holds, that's when that cellular exchange and the cellular repair and the recycling of the proteins and all that other chemistry is going to start to happen within the body.
There's something about breath work, not related to the neurobiology or the physiology, but the psychology of it, that has always stood out with me. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's participating in a research study at McMaster's. The guy's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And we were just talking about these micro bouts. Like, some people won't go to a class, or, they have trouble getting to the gym. We know these people. Sometimes they have the same last name and they live in our household. But it seems like breath work is accessible because everyone can find 10 minutes to engage in this. And I think when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to fear, a lot of that is around a perceived loss of locus of control, that my environment is not predictable. I am not in control of things that are happening to me. And you talked about that earlier. I don't know if I don't disagree with the notion, but I don't know if I completely agree with we've caused everything that happens to us. But if we go outside and we're walking and we have the light and somebody drives through it, they break the law and they hit us with their car, we didn't really create that. I mean, you could say, well, you could have been paying more attention. That was not our fault. Yet we now still have to go to physical therapy. We still have to go through all the stages of getting better. The responsibility is ours, because that driver of the car, they can't go through that process for us, nor would they be likely to do it. But even the first day you show up at physical therapy, I think it adds hope, because you are taking concrete action. You are exerting control over the situation. I kind of hear you saying that about breath work. It's like the second I start to engage in breath work, I see myself, even to a small degree, it's still significant, as someone who is taking action on behalf of my circumstances, and I am engaging in behaviors that are aligned with my well-being.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes back to the idea of radical self-responsibility. If you do have something that you're dealing with, and the other kind of thing that science says is that we only typically use, again, depending on who you listen to, 2 to 5% of our brains. And the other 95% is autopilot. Or you can think of it as the difference between the conscious mind or the intellect and the subconscious mind, what has become the operating system. So if
when people say that, I'm just so curious about that, because I've heard that. Are they talking about like topography? Like, because the brain's kind of integrated. Are they talking about potential? Like, I mean, not to be facetious, but if tomorrow morning you woke up and 95% of your brain was missing, I mean, you'd likely notice. So like, what do they mean with that statement? Is that a literal topographical assessment, or is that like potential? Because that is fascinating.
Potential. So the way that I love, and I learned this from Bob Proctor actually, is if you were to draw a circle being the head and cut it in half, the top half is the conscious mind and the bottom half is the subconscious. Now, we don't develop the conscious mind until around 6, 7 years old. Again, most science agrees with this or says this. So up until that point, you know, what is happening around us? So the way that mom and dad feel about themselves, each other, money, health, how they're interacting with each other, how they treat themselves and each other, all of that we're perceiving and is coming into the subconscious mind before we've developed the capacity to say, in most cases, you know, like anything else, there are exceptions. But it's before we develop the capacity to say, I don't agree with that. I don't agree how you're treating each other. I don't agree, you know, about your perception on money or health or, you know, any of that sort of thing. And that becomes the operating system. And by default, typically, you know, by the age of 35 years old, and most people, it becomes that subconscious program where we're just operating habitual in our lives. We're just kind of going through the motions. Only 2 to 5% are we actually tuning in and saying, you know what? Instead of like just getting up automatically and putting my clothes on, right side, left side,
Okay.
having the coffee, doing the whatever, I'm actually going to choose to do something different today, and I'm going to choose this routine instead. You know,
Okay.
so when you start to overcome habitual patterning and your perceptions and your beliefs and anything that would be unserving to you or stress or fight or flight, you've got to tune in and you've got to choose with that 2 to 5% intellectually and say, you know what? I am scared right now. I am, you know, feeling anxious about this conversation or this meeting. But knowing that, I'm going to choose to do 10 minutes of breath.
Okay. So
And then you feel better and you get on the other side and you're like, wow, that actually worked. And it becomes easier to choose the next time.
Lee, I appreciate that explanation, because that's something that I've always been like, well, that's fascinating, but I don't know what that means. I think if I hear what you're saying correctly, when somebody says like we only use 5% of our brain, 95% of our operating patterns and conditioning is subconscious. We're not aware of it. So we're aware of very little, but there's underneath that surface, there's a lot more that's driving our experiences, emotions, and behaviors. And when you engage in something like breath work, you're starting to cut out a lot of distractions, and you're going through an intrinsic exploration that deepens your self-awareness into what is driving your emotional state, why you're doing the things that you're doing. You're a little bit more present. Do I understand that correctly?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I look at it as conscious awareness. You know, it's like to be able to continue to raise that and expand. And then it's like, wow, like you know, I was here and now I'm here and I
Mm.
feel this much better. I have this much more energy. What else is possible? You know, and I think it just continues to open up to the idea of potential and possibility.
So I was having a conversation with someone very recently. In fact, a friend of mine who, you know, obviously I adore this person, and she's been through a lot. And she was talking about, well, I'm this type of person. I engage in this behavior. I know it's for this reason. And I don't know that I'm really ready to do anything or make any changes yet. And I was like, well, wow. One, you know, you make changes when you're ready to make changes. But two, how many people never get there? They never have the self-awareness to go, okay, this is really what I'm doing, even when it's ugly, even when it's not flattering. It's not the way I want to present myself, but I know I do this, and I understand these to be the triggers. That level of self-awareness is an enormous first step, because when you are ready to make those changes, you're empowered to, because without self-awareness is the key to, or the lock on change and development. I really enjoyed a lot of this conversation where, you talked about classes that people can get involved in for free. Where can we find you? Where can we access some of these resources that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to my site, Lee-Davy, Davy.com, a lot of I've got, I mentioned the 5D deep dive teacher training. That's a kind of a 6 week program. So if not only if you want to do it for yourself, but if it's a tool that you want to expand into and begin to offer others, that the next iteration of that begins May 20th. The free session is every Tuesday on Zoom, so you can actually just send me an email at Lee-Davy, davy.com. And then you can tune into my Instagram, which is 5D Breathwork, and I often post inspirational quotes and then any talks or sessions or anything that I have going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of value there. Thank you, Lee. Really appreciate you spending time with us. It was fun.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for everything you're doing and for the show and for having me on. I feel really grateful to have been able to have this conversation with you as well.